The president's Epstein order: release some of the files. Trump also files a lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal over a letter the paper says Trump wrote to Epstein more than 20 years ago. ICE agents criticized for wearing masks on raids. Our correspondent questions the acting director about the tactic. President Trump wants Coca-Cola to switch to cane sugar. How would that go down? We've got some answers. Hello, I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington, in for Major Garrett. Welcome to the Takeout. It's the issue that won't go away for President Trump, the furor over the Jeffrey Epstein files. He's now ordered his attorney general to seek the release of, quote, any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. But what does that mean? It's unclear how much of the government's evidence is in the form of testimony and whether or how quickly a judge would agree to their release. In his order to release testimony, Trump called this a scam perpetrated by the Democrats that should end right now. But it was his own administration that pushed for the release and claimed there would be bombshell revelations.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Folks, the Epstein client list is a huge deal because it speaks to an enormous problem we have in this country. It is that there is a connected class of insiders that feel that they can get away with anything.
Is this latest move by President Trump enough to stop the bleeding of what many would call a self-inflicted wound? Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins me now right here. Scott, walk us through the process for releasing this kind of testimony and level set for us what could be in it and what is probably not.
It is a glacial process most of the time. You're going through the federal courts, not the fastest place to do business, and you need a federal judge to unseal items that were confidential. I mean, these are grand jury materials. They're necessarily secretive. So you have to convince the judge, and there are going to be some other people who say, please don't unseal this. My client's name might be in there, or my client may be innocently in there. So you usually take months to get to the point where you're unsealing any of it. And if you're unsealing any of it, are you really unsealing the things people want to see? Likely no exhibits, likely no photos, audio, video, possibly no names. So it's less than clear this is going to be satisfying to anybody.
So this is just what potential witnesses did or did not say.
It could be what some of the testimony was, but you may not be able to draw a line to a certain witness or who this person was. Could be a lot of redactions, a lot of that black magic marker you see on a white piece of paper. But also, this could have been started weeks ago by the Attorney General. The president need not authorize the U.S. Department of Justice to seek the unsealing. Pam Bondi could have begun this many, many weeks ago. And all of this, though, really does mark a sea change, doesn't it? It was midweek when the president said that this was a hoax. People should divert their attention. The Justice Department put out a memo last week saying there's nothing more to release. The tide has shifted as the week went on.
Well, we have a new wave because we have breaking news this afternoon. The president just filed a lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, who last night published a report about a, quote, bawdy birthday letter Trump allegedly sent to Epstein in 2003. Tell us about this lawsuit.
Yeah, the president has denied the report and said it was fake and said that he didn't write said letter. The lawsuit's filed in Miami in the federal courthouse in the Southern District of Florida. The complaint was not available as the evening began here in Washington, but we do know this is going to be what they call a libel slander lawsuit, and there are 5 defendants. The owner of the Wall Street Journal, the Dow Jones Company, Rupert Murdoch, who, of course, famously also runs Fox News. It includes the Wall Street Journal, and it includes 2 journalists who are part of the operation, part of the investigation. This is becoming a bit of a pattern where the president has challenged media organizations or challenged his critics or those who disseminate information about him. This will also move in that slow track, though, in the federal court system in Florida.
And you will be covering it.
That's
so
right.
Thank you very much, Scott. We will check in with you about that as it proceeds. Nicole Killian joins me now from Capitol Hill. Nicole, good to see you. So the Epstein fallout is having an impact there, too, right? It delayed a vote on a cuts bill. Can you tell us what Republicans are considering passing when it comes to the Epstein files?
Well, I think it's still a matter of whether or not anything would even be brought to the floor. What we do know from the delays that we saw last night ahead of that rescissions package vote is that there was a pretty robust debate in the Rules Committee, which kind of sets the rules for any type of legislation before it hits the floor. But at that time, you had some Democrats who wanted to offer up an amendment that would bring a bipartisan bill to the floor that would call on the Attorney General to release the Epstein files within 30 days. Republicans shot that down. Instead, what they put forth was this non-binding resolution, also calling for the files to be made public. But because it is non-binding, it really doesn't carry much legal weight. Furthermore, Speaker Johnson last night was fairly non-committal about if and when he may bring this measure to the floor.
But Nicole, Speaker Johnson has been pretty clear that he wants to pass more cuts bills, just like the ones that we saw. He wants to try to claw back more money. Do we know about what he might be targeting next?
Well, it's not so much Speaker Johnson here. It's really, as you know, Ouija, the White House that has been pushing the notion of potentially submitting more rescissions packages to Congress. That is something that Russ Vought, the White House budget director, has said he would like to do. But I would point out that this potentially sets up a big fight here in Congress, particularly as Congress starts working through these appropriation bills to fund the government into the next fiscal year. And Democrats have warned even just this rescissions package that just passed could potentially muddy the waters for Democrats to work with Republicans on a bipartisan basis when it comes to these must-pass government spending bills. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to pass these funds only to have the White House claw it back, it really doesn't set up a good faith arrangement. At least that's the argument that some Democrats are making. So we could see many more funding fights ahead, Ouija.
I'm sure we will. Thank you very much, Nicole. A landmark bill establishing a regulatory framework for the roughly $250 billion cryptocurrency market known as stablecoin has become law. President Trump signed the so-called Genius Act at the White House today and gave remarks.
With today's signing, we're pushing even further into the exciting new frontier. Just as I promised last year, the Genius Act creates a clear and simple regulatory framework to establish and unleash the immense promise of dollar-backed stable coins. This could be perhaps the greatest revolution in financial technology since the birth of the Internet itself.
Bo Hines joins us now from the White House. He is the executive director of the President's Council of Advisors on Digital Assets, more commonly known as the Crypto Council. Bo, I know this is a huge day for you, so thanks so much for spending a little bit of it with us.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So can you just explain what this law does in practice, especially when it comes to offering more protections for consumers who either invest in crypto or want to, but they're not sure?
Sure, yeah. So this is landmark legislation that overhauls the entire financial system. It creates new payment rails. For U.S. consumers, these rails will be much more transparent, more efficient, more cost-effective. So a stable coin is literally a digital dollar that's backed by a real dollar in a bank account somewhere else. And so what we have here is, we're pushing U.S. dollars globally. It gives others in different parts of the world the opportunity to have dollar-backed stable coins in an account. It keeps their money secure and safe. For these stablecoin issuers now, they have to be one-to-one backed. They have to prove they're one-to-one backed in an audit. So we have now full transparency of what they're doing. We're onshoring a lot of the folks that were engaged in this space in the beginning. But, I can't overstate how big of a deal this is. This lays the groundwork for tokenization of public securities. It revolutionizes our financial system.
And Bill, obviously, with all things that have to do with new technology like this, it is a race, a competition. Does the Genius Act do anything to make sure that U.S. stablecoin issuers are going to be the gold standard and that world leaders, recognize this in some way?
Well, even the stablecoin issuers that are offshore now fall under this regulatory regime, which is why this is so huge. Look, the most sought-after thing in the world is the U.S. dollar. They're injecting that into foreign economies, and this secures U.S. dollar global dominance for decades to come. One of the stablecoin issuers that's offshore is going to be the fourth largest purchaser of U.S. treasuries, including all countries this year. That's a remarkable statistic. So now we're not relying on foreign actors any longer just buying U.S. debt. You're going to have private enterprise doing the same thing. But, who stands to benefit from this is the American American people, the American consumer. This technology is revolutionizing the financial system in really tremendous ways, and a lot of what's happening in the crypto space is propelling that forward. So, this is an industry that has been broadly beaten down and kicked down over the course of the last decade. They were victims of policymaking through prosecution and persecution. And now we have a president that recognizes their legitimacy. He stepped up in a huge way to lead the charge on this. And also, I'd be remiss not to thank our brilliant AI and crypto czar, David Sachs. He's done a phenomenal job. He's been the guiding star. This is just fantastic bipartisan work. Over 300 votes in the House for this piece of legislation.
Yeah. Well, on that note about the president's enthusiasm, of course, there are also concerns from Democrats, from others, watchdog groups, that, the president and his family stand to make a whole lot of money here, because even though the provision in the bill, there is one that prohibits any member of Congress or senior executive branch official from issuing a payment stablecoin product during their time in public service, that does not extend to the president or the vice president, for that matter. Why not?
Well, look, the president's family has the right to engage in this space like anyone else. They're private citizens. His interest here is controlled in a blind trust. They're great business people. The president obviously is a phenomenal business person. So are his sons. If they weren't engaged in this emerging technological space, then they probably wouldn't be great business people, to be honest with you, because this is where everything is happening. And they have every right to do that. Look, Democrats weren't that concerned about it because, I have right here the vote total from the cloakroom, and we have, let's see, over 102 Democratic votes for this piece of legislation. So, we feel good about where we are. We're going to continue. We're going to continue to push forward on the crypto agenda, and we're going to get market structure done next.
Can you reassure the American public that there's not a conflict of interest if the president is actively engaged in his family's business?
There's absolutely zero conflict of interest here. None. Not at all. The president has every right, or his family has every right to engage in any space they choose in the U.S. economy. And this space is no different. Why is crypto treated differently than anything else?
And finally, Bo, the president just said a short time ago he'd be growing crypto even more. Do you have any news to share with us?
The president plans on signing market structure legislation into law. So one thing that was missed from some folks yesterday is, clarity moved forward in a bipartisan way as well. I think they had 78 Democrats sign onto that piece of legislation in the House. That's going to go over to the Senate chamber. It's going to get tightened up a little bit there. But, the Clarity Act provides the rules of the road for the digital asset firms in the space. It tells them who the regulator is and what authority that regulator has. When this is through, we will absolutely cement ourselves as the crypto capital of the world. Today was a monumental step in doing that. And really, this is about the president delivering on his promises to this industry and to the American consumer, which he is obviously doing with this bill signing today.
All right, Bo Hines, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Moving to the surprising news in the world of television, CBS announced it is ending The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and retiring the franchise next year. The longtime host spoke about it last night.
The network will be ending The Late Show in May. And yeah, I share your feelings.
CBS News 24/7 anchor and featured host of CBS Mornings, Vlad Duthiers, joins me now. Vlad, great to see you, my friend. Colbert himself was clearly surprised, and this announcement sent shockwaves. What can you tell us more about the decision?
It was seismic, Ouija. That's the only other word that I can think of when it comes to the news that Stephen Colbert is going to be leaving The Late Show in May of 2026. Also, the fact that CBS is not going to replace either the show or Stephen with another host. They're not going to, at this point, as far as we know, there's not going to be a late show on CBS, which is, again, something that is remarkable given the long history of this broadcast. So it was indeed incredibly surprising. Stephen has been at the top of his game almost pretty much since he took over for David Letterman. I think that it came as a shock to all of us, much as it did to that audience, as you can hear them reacting in real time to the news. And look, Paramount has been very, very clear that this has nothing to do with the political climate. It has nothing to do with the internal happenings that are going on with this company and our parent company, Paramount Global. George Cheeks, the president, the co-CEO, and the president of CBS, wrote this in a statement. This is purely a financial decision against a challenging backdrop in late night. It is not related in any way to the show's performance, content, or other matters happening at Paramount. What I think is important to hone in on, Ouija, is that sentence that signifies that this is a financial decision. Matt Bellany, in the piece that I did earlier for CBS Mornings, told us that these shows are just not viable from an economic standpoint as they were 10, 20 years ago. All of the late night shows have seen economic pressures as people gravitate away from linear television to other means of getting their information and getting their entertainment, from streaming to their phone devices. In fact, Matt said something that I thought was pretty surprising. He told us that he doesn't expect that any of these shows will be around in the next 5 years.
That is so interesting, Vlad, because as you mentioned, CBS has made abundantly clear that this is purely a financial decision. Despite that, there is still speculation, right, that this is somehow tied to the Paramount settlement with the Trump administration, with President Trump, that unfolded just a few weeks ago. What does all of this tell you, Vlad, about the current relationship between politics and the media, especially when you have senators, U.S. senators, weighing in and voicing their concerns that this could be related to that settlement?
I would say that relationship is incredibly tenuous. As you point out, we've got a statement from Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. She posted on X. I thought this was really telling. She wrote, CBS canceled Colbert's show just 3 days after Colbert called out CBS parent company Paramount for its $16 million settlement with Trump, a deal, Elizabeth Warren writes, that looks like bribery. Adam Schiff, who was actually a guest on the show last night, said if Paramount and CBS ended the Late Show for political reasons, the public deserves to know and deserves better. So you can see that some of these politicians are already sort of weighing in on what you're suggesting there, which is that there seems to be, at least from where they sit, this relationship between the administration and some of the people who own these media organizations that they find troubling. But again, going back to the statement from George and the statement that you even heard Stephen making there when he announced it, this appears to be just for financial reasons. And anybody reading into it is not going to find any there, according to George Cheeks.
All right, Vlad, thank you so much. Always great to see you.
Good to see you, my friend.
Still to come, President Trump wants Coke to switch back to cane sugar. We look at how the soft drink giant is responding. Also, the battle over research funding at college campuses. I speak to the president of a university fighting for more dollars. And next, acting ICE Director Todd Lyons, his defense of agents using masks during operations. The acting director of ICE today defended the use of agents wearing masks during operations. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez is here with more on his conversation with Todd Lyons. Camilo, it's always so good to see you. So tell us about your exchange with him about the mask, and please remind us how we got to this point that these agents started wearing them to begin with.
Well, as you know, there have been growing tensions in some communities and ICE because of the aggressive tactics that the agency has employed to carry out President Trump's aggressive crackdown on illegal immigration. One of the sources of that growing tension is the use of masks by agents who are conducting the arrest of people who are suspected of being in the country illegally. And I asked Acting Director Todd Lyons in ICE why his agency is doing that and whether he's concerned that that could be a dangerous tactic because potentially people could pose as ICE agents. And this is what he told us.
I'm not a proponent of the masks. However, if that's a tool that the men and women of ICE to keep themselves and their families safe, then I'll allow it. I know a lot of elected officials have put forward legislation or proposed legislation about banning of the masks, things like that. I would also want elected officials to help us hold those people accountable that do dox or threat an ICE officer or agent or their family, I think that'd go a long way.
So you will continue to allow ICE officers to wear masks during operations?
I will.
As you just heard, the acting director is saying that this practice will continue because of concerns about officer safety. And we have been told by the Department of Homeland Security that attacks and assaults against ICE officers have increased by more than 800% this year from the same time in 2024.
So basically, they want to conceal their identities.
Because they're concerned about getting doxxed.
Got it. You also went on a ride-along with some of these ICE agents. Can you tell us what you saw?
That's right. We rode along with ICE agents in Maryland yesterday, and we saw different officers arrest suspected gang members and sex offenders who are also in the country illegally. These are the individuals that the president has promised to expel from the country, people who are here illegally, but also are posing a threat to public safety, according to ICE, because of criminal histories or other concerning derogatory information. However, now, as you know, the concern is that the administration's crackdown is extending well beyond those dangerous individuals and also encompassing people who are here illegally but lack any serious criminal record. And the acting ICE director, Todd Lyons, told us that, yes, if ICE agents encounter anyone who is here illegally, irrespective of whether or not they have a criminal record, that person will be taken into custody now.
And then we're also learning that ICE will access personal data for Medicaid enrollees. Can you tell us about why, what they plan to do with this information?
Well, Director Lyons told us that this Medicaid information and information from other government databases will be used by ICE to locate and arrest people suspected of being in the country illegally, including people who have criminal histories, in addition to that immigration violation. But there are a lot of concerns that this could deter immigrants, both those who are here legally and illegally, from accessing key government medical care. And it is really important to note that this is part of a broader effort by the administration to use agencies and resources from across the federal government to fulfill the president's promise of carrying out the largest deportation operation in American history.
Do they have any data to support, what they're alleging when it comes to, people using Medicaid fraudulently?
Well, according to the law, immigrants who are here illegally are not eligible for full Medicaid coverage. However, there is a provision in the Medicaid law that allows for anyone, regardless of immigration status, to access emergency care. So some undocumented immigrants do indirectly get assistance from that Medicaid fund when they have emergencies in a hospital, for example.
Got it. Thank you so much, Camilo, as always, for your reporting. You can see much more of Camilo's interview with the acting ICE director this Sunday on Face the Nation. President Trump notched multiple legislative victories this week, yet those wins were unquestionably spoiled, at least to some extent, by the Epstein controversy plaguing his administration. Our strategist panel will discuss next. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says TSA is opening new security lines for military service members and their families. The expedited screenings, dubbed honor lanes, are already available at 11 airports with plans to expand soon. This is part of a larger revamp of airport security. Noem has already announced the end of the shoes-off policy for all passengers and hinted that larger quantities of liquids may soon be allowed on board. The British government is planning to lower their voting age to 16 ahead of the next general election. It fulfills a campaign promise the center-left Labour Party pledged last year. The move is one of many recent election reforms in the United Kingdom. Already, campaign finance rules have been tightened, and there are now tougher sentences for those convicted of trying to intimidate candidates for office. Joining me now, Democratic strategist Joel Payne and Republican strategist Rena Shah. Guys, it's so good to see you. Hi. So, Rena, I want to start with you because it's been a big week for President Trump, right? Yeah. He got that rescissions package through. He got the Genius Act signed into law today. But those were largely overshadowed by the Jeffrey Epstein story, that he wants to go away. And part of that is because Republicans on the Hill made it so. So I wonder what you make of all this drama and and how Trump has responded to it.
Well, the drama regarding Epstein is, I think, a self-inflicted wound coming from the White House. They haven't messaged well on this. And I think the end of the day, what you're looking at is a case of the GOP worrying that these legislative wins that they've worked so hard to get are being overshadowed by really the sensational headlines that always dominate politics, right? And most Americans are not plugged into the intricacies of what's gone on with this purported client list. Of course, alleged people that are thought to have taken a place and, engaged in activities with Epstein. These are people that, again, have just been alleged to have taken part in a crime. They're named in an affidavit. There's no real client list. But what Trump is trying to do now is get his attorney general to unseal grand jury documents to say...
But we have breaking news.
Yes.
He actually just did that.
Okay.
So,
well, that was the kind of thing we weren't sure could happen. But this is what he needed to show that, look, there is no cover-up by me. There is no big grand conspiracy here. Now, how this plays out is anybody's guess, because we're not used to this kind of stuff intersecting with what are considered a legislative grand slam.
Right.
These two big things that happened on Capitol Hill can thought to be sort of unifying, but this was a week in which I think GOP unity came in a pressure cooker. The Genius Act is something that is effectively putting America at the forefront of digital innovation. We've never had an act like this, talking about the regulation of cryptocurrency. Right. That's one good thing. And then with the rescissions package, you only had two Republican, Fitzpatrick and Turner, be holdouts. So this is a moment in which the White House should be celebrating, but they're on the defense again.
And Joel, Rena says it's anyone's guess how this plays out. What is your guess? Is this going to be enough to sort of quell the base that's been demanding more? When I say that, I mean the ordering of, some files be released. And I wonder what you make of Pam Bondi's role in this, because she could have done this already. She also is the one that promised there would be bombshell revelations. So what do you make of this move today to try to show transparency?
Very bottom line about this, the fact that your question, which comes at a week where Donald Trump had, from his perspective, policy wins, cutting things from the federal government. By the way, I'd say that those are things that are going to come back to bite him, but he did that. And a bipartisan crypto bill that you had over 100 Democrats sign. And you can't have a clean conversation about that because of Jeffrey Epstein and because of the mismanagement of this controversy from President Trump, from Attorney General Bondi, and from others. And so, bottom line politics, Donald Trump does not get the win this week that he sorely needs. Also, this has been a pretty good run for Donald Trump in terms of court victories, in terms of other legislative victories. And yet, if you look at public opinion, it's stagnant at best. And in some cases, he's fallen off. This is as good as it's going to be for Donald Trump, and he's not getting the return that he wants. I'd be really concerned if I was a Republican, particularly one in the White House.
Well, there is a new CNN poll that just came out this week that found Trump's approval rating to be at 42%. That compares to... I asked for some of the approvals ratings of former presidents of their first year of their second terms, just to see how that stacks up. So 47% for Obama, 46% for Bush, 56% for Clinton, 58% for Reagan. So this is lower than all of those. Right. Rena, what does that tell you about how, Americans think he's performing?
It speaks to the moment of policy wins not really translating to what could be personality wins, because the personality has always overshadowed the policy with Trump. But when he took office, he promised to be active, and that he's done. But it's not been active in the way that most centrist Americans want. And if we look at overwhelmingly where America is going, it's going to the middle. It's going to the independents. And the independents did not want to see $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts. In our native West Virginia, that is going to sting. Rural health care is taking such a big hit in this big mega bill that they crammed down the throats of Republicans that didn't even want it in both chambers. I think that was an unforced error. But also look at the win that just happened the other day, well, actually just a couple days ago, with $9 billion being cut there by the Senate. And that is a drop in the bucket when we talk about federal government spending, but $1.1 billion being cut from National Public Radio, public broadcasting system. People did not want that. As a little girl, again, in Southern West Virginia, I'm here today because of NPR and PBS, and I remained a conservative throughout my life. And so to me, this is a problem in which they got to get out front and explain themselves. They promise slashing federal government spending. It's deeply unpopular when people look at where exactly they're hurting Americans and where states cannot fill in the gaps.
And much of those cuts haven't been felt quite yet. But Joel, this same poll that I just mentioned shows that more than 60% of Americans are opposed to that new domestic policy law. I wonder if you think as time goes on, we'll see people responding even more to that.
Well, you're right. Some of the cuts haven't been felt yet, but some of the impact on rural hospitals and on the overall healthcare system have been felt. And I guess I would just also say Donald Trump, a few weeks ago, along with getting his big, beautiful bill, also bought ownership of the American healthcare system. And he has responsibility for it, similar how Barack Obama, when he passed the Affordable Care Act, had responsibility for it. This is Donald Trump's healthcare system. That means when premiums go up in Michigan, that means when rural hospitals close in Maine and in West Virginia, it's on him. And the American people are going to hold him responsible. And I don't know if Republicans across the country have all accepted that yet, but I can tell you, as somebody who knows what Democrats are thinking about going into the next 15 months, this will be a topic that they make sure voters across the country hear loud and clear.
I'm sure that's true. And before we leave, I want to ask about the UK's new voting age. 16? Could that ever work in the U.S.? Should it ever work in the U.S.?
I don't think so. Look, I'm always somebody that wants more people connected to the ballot box. But before we give ballots to younger people, we need to push civic literacy. Eighth graders, 26% of them are civically literate when you look at certain surveys. And when I think about the future of voting, I think about the great problems we have with people just not understanding what's happening at their local, state, and federal levels. So I am not a proponent of lowering the voting age. I don't think it'll happen here soon, but I am a huge proponent of pushing civic literacy in schools.
If they're old enough to drive, old enough to work and pay taxes, I think they're old enough to vote.
Well, that would be 16. Thank you. Joel Payne and Rena Shah, appreciate your time. Well, next, the president of Arizona State University and his warning over major cuts to federal funding for university research. You're watching The Takeout. The Trump administration hasn't held back in its push to influence institutions of higher education. Now, some university leaders are going public in their fight to preserve federal funding for university-based research. President of Arizona State University, Michael Crow, joins me now. He is also on the board of directors for the organization Research for a Stronger America. President Crow, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here, Ouija.
So this is the first time you're speaking out about Research for a Stronger America. Tell us about, the need that you saw to form this group and what your primary goal is.
Well, the main goal, Ouija, is to continue to attain the kind of success that America has seen in the past, going forward into the future against stronger competitors, competitors that we can do well against and beat in many ways. But it's essential that people understand that at the foundation of our technological success, at the foundation of our industrial success, in addition to the workers, are the ideas that come from the universities that drive the technologies forward that our economy is based on. And this has been going on for about 80 years. We're just trying to get people to understand that this is still the case, more the case than ever, and something that we've really got to focus a lot of energy on.
And talk to me about what happens when that federal funding is stripped from universities like Arizona State. What does that mean for people across the country?
Well, what it means is that the edge that we've built in the United States of technological dominance, the creativity that's led to the internet, led to artificial intelligence breakthroughs, has led to new ways of fighting cancer, new ways to defend the country, new ways to help Israel to defend itself using advanced missile protection systems. All these things are the products of graduate students, faculty, research laboratories that are contributing to this stream of knowledge. And so what's at risk is we stop producing the best and the brightest people, we stop attracting the best and the brightest people, and we stop producing the latest tools and systems that allow us to build this technological behemoth that the United States has become.
Those are serious consequences. And so I wonder what the right approach is, right, to try to deal with this pressure from the Trump administration. We've seen various different approaches. When you're talking about a school like Columbia University, they have in large part agreed to what the administration has asked for. And they have been able to retain that funding to continue all that critical work you just laid out. On the other hand, you have an institution like Harvard University that is aggressively fighting back and stands to lose all of that money towards that research. How do you decide what the right strategy is, especially when you factor in what will be best for the public good?
Well, I mean, I think the government is focused on making certain that the laws of the country that are enforced, that freedom of speech is protected, that civil rights are protected by and for all groups that are a part of the university, and that's in a sense one area of focus for the universities. A second area of focus is the 80 years of unbelievable, unparalleled, globally the best that exists development of all the know-how in which the American economy is able to accelerate so quickly. So what's happened here is the attempt to move the universities into compliance with some of the new policies and so forth and so on has gotten confused around the research activities themselves. They're two different things. And so research universities are massive institutions. We have tens of thousands of people, even just at ASU, involved in our research projects. We have thousands of individual research projects. We have thousands of industrial partners. We have tens of thousands of people that we're producing on an annual basis. We run the largest engineering school in the country, for instance. We're graduating over 7,000 engineers a year. All of that is a part of the national competitiveness that the president wants to accelerate to help the United States to be more successful. And what's happening is that that's what's being wounded in the middle of these broader sort of freedom of speech, civil rights discussions and corrections.
All right, Michael Crow of Arizona State University, thank you so much for laying all of that out for us today.
Thank you.
President Trump is pushing the producer of his favorite beverage to change its ingredients. Next, we'll dig into how swapping corn syrup for cane sugar could affect Coca-Cola's taste, as well as some U.S. workers' livelihoods. You're watching The Takeout. President Trump said this week that Coca-Cola has agreed to use cane sugar in U.S. Coke, arguing that it is, quote, just better. But would this change actually benefit U.S. consumers and more broadly the U.S. economy? Earlier, I sat down with Lehigh University professor and the author of the book Junk Food Politics, Eduardo J. Gomez. Take a listen. Help me understand, why would the president get involved with the recipe of Coke at all?
That's a great question. It's very surprising. Of course, we all know that President Trump is a big consumer of Diet Coke, right? He has a Diet Coke button in his office. And so I think he has a personal interest in the product. He enjoys drinking it. And who knows, that could have been possibly why he got so interested in trying to bring sugar cane into the Coke. And so maybe also, sugarcane producer, one of the largest sugarcane producers is located in Florida, his state, which he spends a lot of time in. So it could be a combination of those different reasons for why he's so interested in this initiative or this proposal to bring sugarcane into Coke.
Well, to be clear, Coke hasn't exactly agreed, right? And as far as their statement goes, they say, we appreciate President Trump's enthusiasm for our iconic Coca-Cola brand. More details on new innovative offerings within our Coca-Cola product range will be shared soon. So if you are the Coke company, how easy would it be to, substitute corn syrup for sugarcane if it were to come to that?
It would be very very challenging, very difficult. It would cost the company a lot more. First of all, sugarcane is a product that has tariffs, has taxes on the import of sugarcane. So it ended up costing more for Coca-Cola to change its product. And so that's one of the major challenges. It's not easy to suddenly change a product, especially when you've been using high fructose corn syrup for decades, since the 1980s. Coke did use sugar and other ingredients prior to the 1980s, but after the mid-80s, it started to use high fructose corn syrup. So it's not easy for a major company like that to suddenly change. And especially the costs involved. I mean, it would ultimately come back to the consumer having to pay more for the product.
And what would consumers be getting in return? I've heard a lot anecdotally from people who say, well, you know what? Mexican Coke does taste better. And I believe that is made with sugar cane. Is it healthier than corn syrup? What would the consumer get?
Well, it's not clear that it would be healthier. The difference is some consumers believe there's a taste difference, although I've seen studies show that some tests have been done showing that consumers actually in blindfolded tests prefer the high fructose corn syrup, which they're used to, over the Mexican. There's other reasons why people like the Mexican version of the sugar cane for other different reasons. So it's not clear that it has a different taste or a better taste. And it's not clear that it'll be healthier, right? I mean, of course, more sugar it can't be a healthier option. And in fact, the Robert Kennedy Jr. has been advocating for less corn syrup, but also less sugar, seeing that as something that we should not be consuming as much.
Yes, taste is subjective, of course. But one thing that is not is, the amount of corn that U.S. farmers produce, right? That's a fact. How would this change, if it ultimately happens, impact those farmers?
It would have a devastating impact. We have to remember that in the U.S., the federal government has subsidized corn production for decades. A lot of farms, jobs are dependent on corn production. While a small percentage of corn production goes to high fructose corn syrup, it's still a lot of jobs. And so this would really be detrimental to the corn industry. It would also have potential political ramifications for President Trump, given that a lot of the corn producers are in the Midwest, where a lot of his supporters are located. So, this is it would be very challenging for the corn industry, loss of jobs in that area at a time when Trump has always said he's committed to providing more jobs in the U.S. This would be very questionable why he's proposing something like this.
I was just going to ask you, is this really about soda, or is this about something bigger? Is this about politics for the president?
That's a great question. It doesn't seem to me he's clearly thought out the political ramifications. I mean, it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. What he's proposing is going against his own HHS secretary, who's trying to make us eat healthier. It goes against the corn producers, who thinks it'd be an economic loss. It seems to be really just a decision based on individual choice, individual preference, maybe a tasting something, or just maybe an interest in Coca-Cola itself. Alternatively, there could be some politics behind the fact that Florida, one of his major supporting states, is a major producer of sugarcane, but he really hasn't said anything about that. But it's just not clear to me that this has been really thought through politically.
All right, Professor Gomez, we will try to get some of those answers and hopefully have you back when we hear more about this potential new recipe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, that's it for The Takeout this week. If you missed anything, it's all available on CBSNews.com, the Takeout page, and YouTube and podcast platforms. Get caught up on your conversations with Ambassador John Sullivan, Education Secretary Linda McMahon, former Vice President Mike Pence, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and so much more. Stick around. The Daily Report is coming up next on CBS News 24/7.